the black market summoning. They said the invitation was a joke, just graffiti and whispers. I went anyway, and the basement I found beneath the city was alive with things that shouldn't exist. The stairwell smelled of mold and burned incense, each step echoing like a drum in a cavern too large to be real. The chanting below reached my chest and shook my lungs. At the bottom, the room opened into a wide, low-ceilinged chamber, filled with figures wearing masks carved from bone, moving in a rhythm that seemed both human and wrong. Neon symbols flickered across the walls, painted hastily, pulsing in time with the chanting. They crawled like living veins, shifting shape with every beat of the hidden drums. In the center, a raised altar of cracked stone held a shallow basin filled with a black liquid that seemed to reflect not the ceiling, but other impossible places. The cultists' voices rose and fell, harmonizing in ways that made the hair on my arms vibrate. Each syllable carried the weight of a promise I could not understand. One figure approached the altar, holding a curved knife carved with runes I had never seen before. Its blade shimmered unnaturally, reflecting shapes I could not process with my mind. I ducked behind a column, heart hammering, realizing that the chanting wasn't just sounded, was a pulse, pulling at my thoughts, bending perception, twisting the very space around me. The figures began moving faster, arms swinging, masks glowing, liquid from the altar splashing onto the floor, hissing and evaporating into thin neon-colored smoke that burned the back of my throat. I tried to retreat, but the chamber seemed to expand infinitely, the walls stretching, symbols climbing higher, faces forming in the plaster and staring directly at me with hollow eyes. A sudden shriek tore through the room, silent yet deafening, vibrating my teeth and forcing me to my knees. One figure convulsed violently, mask cracking, revealing something far too wrong beneath. The neon smoke coiled like serpents, climbing up walls, wrapping around the other cultists, who continued their ritual as if unaware of the impossible horrors entwining their bodies. I crawled along the floor, trying to remain unseen. Each step revealed more, small figures, twisted and deformed, slinking along the walls, peering and disappearing like shadows that had teeth. The chanting changed rhythm, slower now, deliberate, and I could swear the figures were aware of me, their eyes behind the masks, tracking my every twitch and breath. One figure stepped toward the altar, stabbing the black liquid with the knife. It rippled unnaturally, revealing faint glimpses of faces that were not human, watching, screaming silently. The walls seemed to pulse in response, the symbols writhing, dripping down like molten glass. And the shadows of the cult twisted into grotesque, impossible shapes that mimicked the liquid. I tried to back away, but the pulse from the chanting caught me, forcing my knees to the ground, my fingers scraping against the stone floor as if it wanted me kneeling. A mask tilted toward me, perfectly still, then suddenly lunged, moving faster than thought, forcing me to roll sideways. Barely escaping the grasp of hands I could barely see, the black liquid began bubbling violently, and the altar convulsed. From its depths, something emerged, humanoid yet grotesque, stretching impossibly, screaming in a chorus that shattered my perception of sound. I tilted backward, hitting the far wall, the chamber tilting impossibly as the cultists moved around me in perfect, synchronized rhythm, each step and gesture designed to pull me deeper. The neon symbols now formed letters I could read, words promising knowledge and death simultaneously, etching themselves into my mind as if I had memorized them by force. I crawled toward a doorway I had ignored, hearing the wet, scraping sound of claws or fingernails along the walls behind me, growing closer, faster, relentless. The figures finally noticed me, their movements, precise and terrifying, circling the altar, chanting louder, summoning something that filled the chamber with a presence I could feel crawling inside me. I slipped through the doorway, barely noticing the stairs back to the street. Every step upward felt like pushing against an invisible force, the chanting echoing behind me, insistent and eternal. I emerged onto the quiet street, the city night calm as if nothing existed below. Yet I could still feel the rhythm of the summoning pulsing beneath my ribs. Even now, when I walk alone, I hear faint whispers and a low, insistent pulse in the distance. The black market still waits, patient, glowing, hungry, and I know it will never stop. The highway thing people warn you about. Everyone in my town knows the story about the thing that walks along Route 17 after midnight, but nobody believes it until they see it themselves. I didn't believe it either when my car broke down on that road at 1:40 a.m. with no signal, no houses nearby, and miles of forest. The engine died suddenly, lights flickering once before the car settled into silence, while the dark highway stretched empty in both directions beneath a cloudless sky. I tried starting the car again, but the key only clicked weakly, leaving me sitting alone in the quiet with nothing except wind moving through trees. Then I saw someone walking along the shoulder of the road far ahead, moving slowly toward my car under the pale wash of distant moonlight. At first I felt relieved because I thought it was another driver or someone from a nearby house who might help me push the car. But something about the way the figure moved made the relief disappear almost immediately, while I watched through the windshield with growing unease. It walked stiffly, each step too slow and careful. Arms hanging straight down without swinging while its head remained perfectly forward. The person never looked around, never hesitated, just continued moving straight toward my car like it had chosen that path long before I arrived. I remembered suddenly what people always say about Route 17 late at night when the road becomes empty and the forests feel too quiet. They say if your car breaks down and you see someone walking towards you on that road, you should never speak first. You should wait. Because if it speaks before you do, then it isn't human. The figure kept approaching slowly until it reached the edge of my headlights, where the light finally revealed its face clearly, or what should have been a face. The skin looked stretched and pale, like wax melting slightly, with eyes that reflected the headlights too brightly to look natural. I locked my doors automatically and felt my pulse pounding in my throat as the figure continued walking closer. It stopped directly in front of my car. It's close enough that I could see small cracks in its lips when it smiled slowly through the windshield. Then it knocked once on the hood. Just one knock. The sound rang louder than it should have in the quiet night air. The thing leaned forward slightly, placing both hands against the front of the car while staring through the glass directly into my eyes. Its mouth opened. I held my breath. Because if the stories were true, the first words mattered. For several seconds, the thing simply stared at me without blinking while the forest around the highway stayed completely silent. Then it finally spoke, but the voice didn't come from its mouth. The sound came from the passenger seat beside me. "Can you give me a ride?" I turned my head slowly. Something was sitting there, smiling. The choir of the forgotten tunnels, deep beneath the city. The walls hummed with a chorus that shouldn't exist. I followed the sound into the forgotten tunnels, and what I saw will haunt me forever. The first steps were hesitant, echoing against broken tiles, water pooling in jagged cracks. The chant grew louder, vibrating through the concrete, twisting the shadows into shapes I couldn't look at directly. Figures appeared from the darkness, cloaked in tattered robes, masks painted in deep crimson, glowing faintly with streaks of phosphorescent green that pulsed with every note of the song. The sound pressed against my chest, a rhythm so precise it forced my heart into sync with the impossible music emanating from every corner of the tunnel. I crouched behind a fallen beam, trying to make sense of the altar ahead. Bones, twisted metal, and glass tubes glowing neon, arranged like a heart someone had broken and rebuilt. One figure leaned over the altar, chanting in a language that clawed at my mind. I could feel the words crawling into my memory, shaping thoughts I didn't own. The shadows on the walls began to shift independently, forming faces that blinked, mouthed words silently, and stared at me with expressions of impossible malice and ecstasy combined. A faint metallic smell filled the tunnel, thick and coppery. And I realized it was not only the neon tubes burning, it was something organic, bleeding into the air with deliberate intent. I tried to back away, but the floor beneath my feet seemed to pulse, each step sinking into something alive, and I understood that escape was no longer optional. One figure turned fully toward me, mask glowing green. I saw teeth protruding through the porcelain eyes, grinning silently. As if aware I was trespassing where no human should survive. The chanting intensified, now a wave that lifted and pushed me, pressing against my chest, forcing my vision to swim with flashes of light I could barely process. I stumbled into a pool of water, the reflection rippling, showing not my face but dozens of pale, screaming masks, staring back, mouths opening and closing without sound. The kneeling cultist drew a blade long and thin, slicing the air above the altar, sending sparks into the neon symbols that writhed along the walls like living veins. The shadows detached from the walls, coiling around the masked figures, tightening and twisting, yet the cult moved in perfect harmony, unaffected, as if the shadows were partners in the ritual. I felt a tug at my shoulder, invisible hands gripping me, pulling me toward the altar. My feet refused to move against it, though my mind screamed to run. The neon symbols began crawling up the ceiling, forming geometric patterns that warped perception, bending the tunnel like liquid concrete, leaving me dizzy, nauseous, and terrified. One figure extended a hand toward me, dripping black liquid. The floor beneath my knees rippled, and I could swear the altar's glow reflected impossible faces that weren't mine. The chanting shifted into a harmony of whispers, each voice speaking directly into my skull, revealing memories I had never had, futures that didn't belong to me. Key. I tried to scream. My voice wouldn't come. Key. I felt myself merging with the rhythm of the choir, unwillingly, every nerve pulsing with the impossible, inhuman music. The altar shuddered, bones rattling, neon tubes sparking. K. And the air grew thick with a viscous fog that smelled like burned hair and copper, curling into my lungs as I gasped. K. I backed into the tunnel wall, feeling it pulse under my hands. Shadows stretched toward me, faces forming, mouthing the words I couldn't understand, promising things I didn't want. One mask stepped toward me, tilting its head unnaturally, and I realized the figure wasn't walking, it was sliding across the floor, defying gravity in a rhythm synced to the song. The neon altar pulsed violently, sending flashes that revealed dozens of smaller masked figures, crawling in and out of the floor, walls, and ceiling, observing, waiting, conducting me into the ritual unknowingly. I fell backward, stumbling over debris, flashlight flickering, reeling twisted statues of bone and neon, each one depicting impossible movements, impossible forms that should not exist in our reality. The choir's song rose to a crescendo, the shadows coalescing into forms that defied physics, faces screaming, arms stretching impossibly, yet all perfectly synchronized in silent, grotesque ecstasy. I scrambled toward the exit, the chanting vibrating through every bone in my body, the tunnel stretching and narrowing, distorting my perception, turning seconds into hours of unbearable terror. As I reached the mouth of the tunnel, the figures vanished, leaving only the pulsing neon altar behind, humming with a life of its own, waiting for the next intruder foolish enough to enter. Even now, long after escaping, I hear the faint hum beneath the city. Sometimes in my dreams, sometimes in silence at night, and I know the choir still waits, patient, glowing, and eternal. The man who films cults that don't want to be seen. Some people hunt ghosts. I film cults. Most disappear after a few weeks. The one I found outside a dying highway town is still active, and I wish I never pressed record. I drove through the town at 2 in the morning, streetlights flickering over empty storefronts and boarded houses. My camera battery was full. My instincts told me something lived here. The tip came from a truck driver who said he'd seen people walking through the woods wearing surgical masks, carrying lanterns that burned blue instead of yellow. I parked near the abandoned grain silos and followed a narrow dirt trail cutting through dead trees. My camera rolling, the infrared light painting everything in ghostly green shadows. At first I heard nothing but wind scraping branches together. Then a faint rhythmic clicking began somewhere deeper in the woods, mechanical, precise, and completely unnatural. The clearing appeared suddenly between the trees, and I froze. At least 20 figures stood in a perfect circle wearing identical white masks with thin vertical slits. No chanting, no talking, just that clicking sound echoing from the darkness while every masked head slowly turned toward the center of their circle. In the middle stood a wooden chair bolted into the ground. A man sat tied to it, alive, breathing slowly, eyes open, staring at nothing. The clicking stopped. One cult member stepped forward holding a small handheld camera identical to mine, pointing it directly at the man in the chair. Another stepped forward with a second camera, then another. Soon, every masked figure lifted cameras, silently filming the man-like predators studying prey. The man in the chair finally blinked and whispered something I couldn't hear. Every cultist leaned slightly forward at the exact same time. The first scream came suddenly and violently. The man's body jerked against the restraints like electricity had shot through him. The cultists didn't move. They simply kept filming. I zoomed my lens and realized the man wasn't screaming in pain. He was screaming in confusion, like someone waking from a nightmare that refused to end. His eyes darted around the circle, landing on each mask, each camera lens staring back like cold mechanical eyes recording every second. One masked figure stepped closer and tilted their camera toward the man's face, adjusting focus with calm, practiced movements. Then the clicking sound returned, a toe. But now I understood it. Toe. It wasn't mechanical. It was every cultist pressing the record button on their cameras simultaneously. The man's breathing grew frantic. He begged them to stop filming. His voice cracked, desperate, terrified. No one answered. Instead, one cultist reached behind the chair and slowly pulled something metallic into the dim lantern light. He looked at his reflection and immediately started screaming again, louder this time. Raw panic tore through his voice like he'd seen something impossible staring back. I zoomed my camera further, trying to see the reflection clearly. But the angle was wrong, and the glass caught nothing but darkness. The cultists leaned closer with their cameras, capturing every twitch of the man's terror like surgeons studying an experiment. The man began thrashing violently against the chair, begging them to break the mirror. "Please," he shouted, voice cracking. "That's not me." The circle stayed silent. Every camera kept recording. The man's screams turned into choking sobs as he stared at the mirror like it was alive, whispering something only he could see. One of the cultists slowly stepped forward and gently turned the mirror so the man couldn't look away anymore. T's body went completely still. Then he whispered 3 words, "Followed me." The cultists lowered their cameras at the exact same moment. Clicking stopped, and every single masked head slowly turned in my direction. I ran before the first lantern light shifted toward the trees, my camera still recording the sound of footsteps moving calmly through the forest behind me. I never uploaded the footage, because when I reviewed the recording later, the mirror finally caught the reflection clearly. The man was right. Something was standing behind him, and it wasn't one of the cultists.